I still remember the day I first laid eyes on Amanda. It was 7th grade, and I was the new kid at Oak Ridge Middle School. As I shuffled into homeroom, trying to make myself as invisible as possible, I saw her. Blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, a warm smile that lit up the room, and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and kindness. My heart did a little flip, and I knew I was done for. Of course, I didn't have the courage to talk to her then. I was just a quiet, bookish kid who always had his nose buried in a textbook. But fate had other plans. We ended up paired for a science project, and suddenly I found myself spending hours with the girl of my dreams. To my surprise, Amanda wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant. We bonded over our shared love of learning, staying up late to perfect our project and talking about everything under the sun. I still remember how my palms would sweat every time she leaned in close to point something out in our notes. As we moved into high school, our friendship blossomed into something more. Our first kiss was behind the bleachers after a football game sophomore year. It was awkward and fumbling, but to me it was perfect. From that moment on, we were inseparable. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. Smart, quiet guy and the popular, outgoing girl. It was like something out of a teen movie. But what they didn't see was how perfectly we balanced each other out. Amanda brought me out of my shell, encouraging me to join clubs and go to parties. I helped ground her, providing a calm presence when she got overwhelmed by her many commitments. College came, and unlike many high school sweethearts, we chose to stay together. We both got into State University, and suddenly we were navigating adulthood side by side. Late-night study sessions turned into dreaming about our future together. I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. Junior year, I saved up for months to buy the perfect ring. It wasn't much, just a simple solitaire. But when I got down on one knee in the middle of the quad where we'd had our first college date, Amanda's eyes filled with tears of joy. She said yes and threw her arms around me. I felt like the luckiest man alive. We got married young, 22, fresh out of college. But honestly, it didn't feel like a rush. Amanda and I had been together for years by that point, and it just seemed like the right next step. It wasn't some whirlwind romance or impulsive decision. We had history, we shared goals, dreams, the whole thing. Getting married felt less like a statement to the world and more like cementing the bond we built since that science project in 7th grade. The wedding was nice. Nothing extravagant, because we weren't those kinds of people. That small chapel outside of town with the stone facade and ivy creeping up the sides was perfect for us. Amanda looked beautiful, but that was no surprise to anyone. Her blonde hair woven into some intricate braid, the dress simple but elegant. We said our vows under a clear sky while my mom and stepdad, Greg, watched with pride. The whole thing went by in a blur, honestly. I remember standing up there shaking with excitement and nerves. I wasn't really sure which, and thinking, this is it. I'm building my life with her. The transition into adulthood, post-wedding, was surprisingly smooth. Amanda took a job as an engineer while I ended up in pharmaceutical sales. It's funny how we just settled into our roles, as if that was the plan all along. She was ambitious from the start, always staying late at work, eager to move up. Her brain was wired for numbers and schematics in a way mine never could be. I admired it, even when it meant we had less time together. For me, work was fine, just fine. Sales wasn't what I dreamed of, but it paid well enough. There were no real complaints. A couple of years later, our daughter was born. That little moment right there made it all feel more real, more permanent, somehow. Having a kid changes the stakes like overnight. You just gotta grow up. You have no choice. It wasn't easy. Anyone pretending parenthood's a walk in the park is full of crap. Between sleepless nights and juggling work, we'd find ourselves exhausted. But we always figured we were in this together. That was important to me, to feel like we were a unit navigating this weird, exhausting version of life. We lived close to my mum too, which made things feel secure. She was always a reliable presence, the sort of solid anchor that made the chaos of a screaming baby and work stress feel more manageable. Greg, my stepdad, was around a lot too. He wasn't the type of guy who faded into the background, not with his size or personality. At 6'5", with that bulky frame, he always carried himself like someone with authority, probably from his days as a basketball star, or close enough to one. You never stopped hearing about his time playing ball overseas, like you'd think he was inches away from being a legend or something. He didn't make it into the NBA, sure, but he still had that swagger. There's something that happens when you grow up around a guy like that. You learn how to navigate the space he takes up, physically and metaphorically. I guess I'd always learned to adapt, to stay quieter and let him talk, to not challenge the space he filled. It wasn't a conscious thing, just the natural order of things. But if I'm being honest, the cracks had been there all along. Greg had this aura like he could walk into a room, and heads would still turn. People just gravitated toward him, and I think I got used to fading into the background when he was around. I'm 5, so whenever I stood beside him, I always felt a little diminished. It's not like I dwelled on it. Amanda never seemed bothered by my height, and I kept myself in decent shape. I go to the gym a few times a week, do my runs, keep myself as fit as possible. But it always felt like I was compensating for something. Nothing was ever outright said, but there was an unspoken comparison whenever Greg joined family dinners or when we'd all go out for lunch somewhere. His old basketball stories dominated the conversation, and everyone leaned in like they were listening to a coach or a general or something. I'd laugh it off, play my role at those moments, nod along at his anecdotes. Polite acknowledgement, never really letting it get to me outwardly. Amanda, though, she loved those stories too. She'd light up when Greg got into the groove of detail about a game-winning shot or an overseas tournament win, those little flickers of excitement I didn't often see from her when she talked to me about sales projections or my day-to-day work. Not that she wasn't supportive, she always asked how my job was going, how meetings went or what targets I had. But it was different, you know. I wasn't her basketball hero or any kind of hero. I was the reliable guy who locked down a practical job and took care of our family. Nothing glamorous about that. Still, I told myself that as long as we were in this parenting thing together, that's all that mattered. What I didn't imagine back then, what I didn't let myself imagine, was how far apart we were starting to drift. There were no big blowout fights or screaming matches. It wasn't that kind of distance. It was slower. The kind that's hard to notice it until you realize it's been months since you've truly connected. Amanda was working more, especially after a promotion. Late nights in the office and weekend hours. She'd come back, balance baby duties with a smile as best she could. But some nights we'd collapse into bed without much more than a passing good job about who got Olivia to sleep faster. Olivia, my 2-year-old, was the one thing that gave me any sense that this was all worth it. Those small moments meant everything, like when she grabbed my finger with her tiny hand, or when she'd babble something incoherent but clearly trying to communicate a very important toddler thought. It anchored me in ways I think Amanda had already started loosening from. Around the same time, something else started bothering me. I'd always tolerated Greg's presence, but it started to gnaw differently. Like the comparison between us was getting under my skin more often than it used to. He'd come by, help fix the roof or something, and Amanda would mention how handy he was, or talk about how good he was with Olivia, throwing her up in the air like some gentle giant. And instead of being proud that Olivia had a step-grandfather who adored her, it made my insides twist. There was this moment, it's clear as day in my memory, when Greg picked her up, and Amanda joked about how Olivia would inherit the tall genes from Greg's side. I didn't laugh. It wasn't even mean-spirited when she said it, but it hit me in a weird place. I leaned back into my work, trying to shake those feelings off. I told myself it was stupid, just some dumb insecurity about my height creeping in. My job was solid. I had a family. I went to the gym to stay in shape. What more did I want, right? But I couldn't stop noticing the looks, to the way Amanda smiled a little extra when Greg was around, or how she'd slip into a different version of herself when he started talking basketball stats, or about the latest roofing gig he tackled like it was some Herculean task. I started wondering when she stopped smiling at me like that. Or maybe she never had, and I just didn't notice until now. And I kept thinking about how, despite everything I did, Greg had this effortless way about him. Like he didn't have to try at all, didn't have to lift a finger, and people respected him, admired him. Meanwhile, I was sweating to keep our lives balanced, trying to be a good dad, a good husband, even when Amanda and I were feeling like two parallel lines that never quite intersected anymore. So I didn't realize at the time how much that slow erosion of confidence was eating at me. It's funny how these things creep up, insecurities. They start small, but man, they snowball faster than you'd think. Before I knew it, I was hyper-aware of every smile Amanda gave Greg, every time she laughed a little too hard at one of his stupid jokes, every subtle shift in her tone when talking about. It wasn't just him. It was everything tied to him, his confidence, his swagger, his weird pseudo-father figure role he played in my life. I started feeling like less of a man when he was around, and somehow, less of a husband. At 5, that physical difference became more than just inches tall. It became miles across in my mind. I closed another deal early that day, feeling a rare spark of excitement. For once, I'd be home before Amanda, maybe surprise her, and spend some quality time with Aaliyah. As I pulled onto our street, I noticed Greg's truck parked a few houses down. Typical Greg, always around, larger than life. I tried to push away the familiar twinge of insecurity that crept up whenever I thought about my stepfather. I slipped in through the side door, a habit I'd picked up to avoid tracking dirt through the front. The house was quiet, but as I headed upstairs, I heard something. Muffled sounds, for my heart started racing, a sick feeling settling in my stomach. No, it couldn't be. But as I approached our bedroom, the noises became unmistakable. I pushed open the door, and the world stopped. There, in our bed, the bed where we'd conceived Olivia, where we'd shared countless intimate moments, was Amanda, with Greg. My wife and my stepfather tangled together, oblivious to my presence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, frozen, as the reality of what I was seeing tore through me like a knife. How long had I been standing there? Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. Finally, Amanda noticed me. Her eyes went wide, and she scrambled to cover herself. Greg looked shit. I don't even know how to describe it. Shocked, guilty. I couldn't process it. David, Amanda's voice was shrill, panicked. I can explain. So I found my voice, though it came out as barely or more than a whisper. Explain what? She kept stammering, pulling the sheets around her. I needed something different. Do you understand, right? I needed something different. The words felt hollow, meaningless. How could she possibly think that explained anything? I looked at Greg, the man who'd been in my life since I was a kid. The larger-than-life ex-athlete who'd always made me feel small. He wouldn't meet my eyes. How long? I managed to ask. Amanda shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It doesn't matter. David, please. It did matter. It mattered more than anything. How long? Greg finally spoke, his voice rough. David, son. Don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare call me that. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at them anymore. I turned and walked out, ignoring Amanda's pleas for me to come back, to let her explain. For what was there to explain? I got in my car and just drove. No destination in mind, just away. Away from that house, away from the image seared into my brain. I ended up at a park near my old high school, the place where Amanda and I used to hang out after class. Sitting on a bench, I tried to make sense of it all. How had I not seen this coming? Or had there been signs I'd miss? I thought about all the times Greg had been around, how Amanda had always seemed to light up when he was there, how she'd laugh at his jokes, hang on his every word when he told his old basketball stories. God, I'd been so blind. I thought about calling my mom, but how could I tell her? How could I be the one to shatter her world too? She didn't deserve this pain. As the sun started to set, my phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls from Amanda, from Greg, even from my mom. Text messages I couldn't bring myself to read. I turned it off. I couldn't go home. The thought of walking back into that house, of seeing that bed, I couldn't do it. But where else could I go? I had no real close friends. Amanda had always been my best friend. The irony of that made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I ended up checking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, which felt fitting. And I lay on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Amanda's words kept echoing in my head. I needed something different. What did that even mean? Was I not enough? Had I ever been enough? I thought about all the times I'd felt inadequate next to Greg, how his presence always seemed to diminish me somehow. Had Amanda felt that too? Had she always seen me as less than? I thought about Olivia, our beautiful little girl. How could I explain this to her? How could I protect her from the mess we'd made? As the night wore on, I felt the numbness start to give way to a deep, aching pain. The betrayal cut so deep, not just from Amanda but from Greg too. The two people I should have been able to trust most in the world had destroyed everything in one fell swoop. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the dingy curtains. For a brief, blissful moment, I forgot where I was and why. Then it all came crashing back and the pain hit me anew. But I turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the flood of notifications. Dozens of missed calls and messages, so I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. Instead, I called in sick to work. The thought of putting on a fake smile and trying to sell anything felt impossible. As I sat there in that grimy motel room, I realized I had no idea what to do next. The life I'd built, the future I'd planned, it all felt like it had been a lie. Where did I go from here? How could I ever trust anyone again? The weight of it all felt crushing. I'd always prided myself on being reliable, on being the steady presence in our family. But now I felt lost, adrift in a sea of betrayal and doubt. I knew I'd have to face it all eventually. I'd have to talk to Amanda, confront Greg, tell my mom. But for now, I just sat there, letting the pain wash over me, wondering how I'd ever put the pieces of my life back together. A few days later, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She cleared her throat, but I didn't look up. "David, can we talk?" I kept my eyes fixed on the screen. Nothing to talk about. She sighed, moving closer. "Please, we need to." I said, "There's nothing to talk about." My voice was ice. So Amanda's hand reached out, hovering near my shoulder. I flinched away before she could touch me. The memory of her with Greg flashed through my mind, making my stomach churn. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I messed up, but..." "I messed up?" I finally turned to face her, my eyes hard. "You didn't mess up, Amanda. You destroyed everything." Her face crumpled, but I felt no sympathy. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was betrayal. "I love you, David. We can work through this." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call fucking my stepfather?" Amanda recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "Good. Let her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused me." "That's not fair," she mumbled. "Fair?" My voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to throw away our marriage because you needed something different?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save it. I'm not interested in your excuses." I stood up abruptly, needing to get away from her. As I headed for the door, I heard Olivia start to cry from her room. Amanda moved to go check on her, but I waved her off. "I've got it," I said coldly. "It's the least I can do since I couldn't protect her from having a cheater for a mother." Amanda's sharp intake of breath followed me down the hall. I pushed aside the guilt trying to creep in. She didn't deserve my sympathy. In Olivia's room, I scooped up my daughter, holding her close. Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "It's okay, sweetie," I murmured. "Daddy's here." As I rocked Olivia, my mind wandered to all the moments I'd missed with her lately. But I'd been so caught up in my own pain that I hadn't realized how much this tension was affecting her. I carried Olivia out to the living room, where Amanda was still standing, looking lost. When she saw us, she attempted a smile. "Is she okay?" Amanda asked softly. I nodded curtly. "She's fine." Amanda reached out, stroking Olivia's hair. "Hey, baby girl, Mummy's here too." I wanted to pull Olivia away, to shield her from Amanda's touch. But I knew that wasn't fair to our daughter. No matter how I felt about Amanda, she was still Olivia's mother. We stood there awkwardly, both focused on Olivia. For a moment, we almost felt like a family again. But then I remembered why we weren't, and the coldness seeped back in. "I'm going to put her down for a nap," I said, turning away from Amanda. As I tucked Olivia into her crib, I whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm trying to be strong for you." Back in the living room, Amanda was waiting. She looked at me with pleading eyes. "David, please, can we just talk?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What's there to say, Amanda? You cheated. With Greg, of all people." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. But I love you, and I love Olivia. We can fix this." I shook my head. "I don't know if we can. Every time I look at you, all I see is you with him." Amanda stepped closer, reaching for my hand. I let her take it, but I felt nothing. Her touch, once so comforting, now left me cold. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, "but our family is worth fighting for. Please, David, give me a chance to make this right." I pulled my hand away. "I need to go see my mom." But Amanda's face fell. "You told her?" "Of course I told her," I snapped. "Greg's her husband. She deserved to know what kind of man she married." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Amanda called after me, "David, wait." But I was already gone. The drive to my mum's house was a blur. When she opened the door, the pain in her eyes mirrored my own. We didn't say anything, just held each other as the tears finally came. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table, two broken people trying to make sense of the wreckage of our lives. "I'm so sorry, Mom," I choked out. I should have seen it coming. I should have. She cut me off, squeezing my hand. This is not your fault, David. Don't you dare blame yourself. I nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at me. How are you holding up? Mom sighed, looking older than I'd ever seen her. I'm processing. It's like I don't even know who Greg is anymore. Join the club, I muttered. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Mom spoke again. What are you going to do about Amanda? I shrugged, feeling lost. I don't know. Part of me wants to forgive her for Olivia's sake, but every time I try, I just get angry all over again. So Mom nodded, understanding. It's okay to be angry, David. What they did was unforgivable. But don't let the anger consume you. You're better than that. I knew she was right, but it was hard to see past the pain. I just don't know how to move forward from this. One day at a time, Mom said softly. That's all any of us can do. As I drove home, her words echoed in my mind. One day at a time. It seemed impossible, but what choice did I have? When I walked in the door, Amanda was waiting. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked as lost as I felt. How's your mom? She asked quietly. How do you think? I replied, but there was less venom in my voice than before. Amanda nodded, looking down. I'm sorry, to both of you. I sighed, suddenly feeling exhausted. I know you are, Amanda, but sorry doesn't fix this. What will? She asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I shook my head. I don't know, but for Olivia's sake, I'm willing to try and figure it out. It wasn't forgiveness, not by a long shot, but it was a start. Filing the divorce papers felt mechanical, like I was watching myself from a distance, detached from the weight of each signature. There wasn't much hesitation. I'd come to terms with the fact that there was no future for me and Amanda anymore. After what had happened, I couldn't see her the same way. I couldn't see myself the same way either. She didn't take it well. Amanda begged, and I mean begged, more than I'd ever seen her do in all the years we were together. She'd always been this collected, driven person. It's like the cracks showed for the first time, her makeup smeared, hair falling in her face as she repeated over and over, as she was sorry, how we could fix this, how it wasn't worth tossing everything away. But I couldn't hear, literally couldn't. Her words flew by like the static from a busted radio, and all I could think about was the vision of her in that bed with Greg. Joined in my own home. No less. The betrayal felt bottomless, like a hole that only widened the more she tried to talk. Her explanations, her apologies, they just bounced off me empty. By the time we were officially in the thick of the divorce process, our conversations were cold, transactional. It got to the point where when her texts came in, I'd skim them, hunting for the only thing I cared about, updates on our daughter. Everything else felt unnecessary, noise in the background. She tried to bring it up again, wanting another chance, trying to explain if I'd only just listen, but there was nothing left to hear. Not from her. From her. The thing that ate at me most, though, was Greg. I didn't recognize him now as someone who'd been in my life for so long. A guy who'd been part of family dinners, someone my mum adored, someone who'd watched me grow. He wasn't that guy anymore. He was the bastard who gutted everything I'd built and made me question who I even was. What I couldn't shake was the sense that he took something from me permanently. Not just Amanda. It was deeper than that. Made me feel less of a man watching her gravitate toward him, drawn to the parts of him I'd never have. His confidence, his height, his fucking charisma that made everyone see him before they saw me. I hated how much it stuck with me. How much I compared myself to him even after he ruined everything. Was it always lurking? That need of hers for something I never was. Had there ever been a point where she'd love me for who I was? Or had it always been some ticking clock leading to this? That thought rotted in my mind night after night. Didn't matter how much I wanted rid of it, it stayed. And it chipped away at everything I thought I knew about myself. I couldn't help but pull away from everyone, shutting them out without realizing I was even doing it. Friends reached out, asking if I wanted to grab a drink or catch up, but I wasn't interested. I hated the idea of pretending that nothing had changed when, inside, I didn't recognize myself anymore. The nights were the hardest. Couldn't sleep, not really. Just laid there, tossing between flashes of the past and everything I'd failed to see. Amanda, laughing that infectious laugh of hers back when I proposed, thinking we had it all figured out. To that memory now twisted. Like everything in my life was written dirtied, and Greg loomed large in every single goddamn memory afterward, like he'd always been watching from the sidelines, biding time before stepping into my life and ruining it. There were days I couldn't even bear to look at Olivia because every time I did, I remembered how much I was sacrificing for the sake of stability for her future. This whole divorce thing was going to screw with her without a doubt. I tried to shelter her from it, but there's only so much you can cover up when your world's falling apart, you know. Amanda and I strictly talked about her at this point. Drop-offs, pick-ups, coordinating everything to make sure Olivia's life stayed as normal as possible. But every interaction with Amanda was clinical, icy. None of that warmth we used to have. None of the brief hugs or the slight touch of her hand on mine when we exchanged Olivia. All those small things we used to take for granted were gone. Dead. Good riddance, honestly. I didn't need them anymore. I'll give therapy credit though, wasn't sold on it at first, but when you're sinking, you grab onto anything that'll keep your head above water. The therapist's office became the only place I didn't need to fake it. I could just dump everything, get it out without feeling like I was burdening someone. No one I knew had done what Greg did. No one knew how to help me process it. You try asking a buddy how you get over your stepdad fucking your wife. Yeah, that's not a conversation they're equipped to handle. It helped untangle some of that mess in my head, piece by piece, making things hurt a little less. Not gone, just manageable. And Olivia, my daughter, man, she was my anchor in all of it. Focused hard on being around her as much as I could, taking her to parks, feeding the ducks, building those little memories that I hoped would stick with her without the cloud of this divorce always hanging overhead. It helped. Helped more than I realized at first. She didn't know what she was doing for me, but she kept me grounded, kept me from going off the deep end. I hit the gym harder too. I'd always been consistent enough about fitness, but now it was about more than that. It became an outlet, a way to channel all that anger I kept bottled up under the surface. Working on my physical health gave me something I could control. Felt good to push myself, to see the results physically after feeling completely powerless in every other part of my life. I even started thinking of going back to school. Something I let slide during my marriage. Pharmaceutical sales had become a grind I didn't care for anymore. And maybe I was ready for a fresh start in more ways than one. The process wasn't linear though. Some days I felt strong, ready to move forward, and others, I'd spiral right back into that headspace where everything about myself felt inadequate. Tall shadows still lingered in my mind, reminding me how much of a nothing I felt standing next to Greg. But those spirals became fewer. Shorter. That was progress, I figured. As months passed, Amanda and I kept our contact to the bare essentials. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses from her or rehashing what went wrong. That ship had long sailed. We'd split up our assets, figured out custody, and that was it. The final nail in the coffin. I thought somewhere deep, I'd still feel something when I signed the last of the paperwork. That sadness or regret. Or something would bubble up. But when it was done, when our lives on paper were officially divided, I just walked out of the attorney's office feeling nothing. Just a hollow that stretched wide but somehow felt cleaner than the mess I'd been sinking in for months. I'll never trust Amanda again. That much was certain. And I knew this whole mess had changed who I was, rewired me. I felt harder, more closed off, but also in some way there was clarity. I didn't need what I used to think was validation. You didn't need anyone else to make me feel like a goddamn man. That was something I knew now, more than ever, I had to find within myself. And slowly, methodically, I was getting there. Trust didn't come easy now. I doubted myself, doubted others, but I figured that was natural. It took time. And that's all right. Through all of it, I realized I didn't need Amanda after all. The future I have with Olivia, though, that was the life I gave a shit about. The rest could burn for all I cared. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.